Join us as adventurers through God's Word, the Holy Lands, and beyond, exploring the fascinating and the weird, the difficult and the obscure. Come and see how the stories are woven together and how they still apply to our lives today.
We promise to bring you joy, hope, inspiration, and intriguing out-of-the-box thinking, and ultimately salvation through Jesus Christ.
Welcome back to another episode of
Live Life in the Spirit.
We're your hosts. I'm Pastor Penny Schulz.
And I'm Kristen Scherenberg.
And we are so glad you are joining us. We want you to like and subscribe and make sure that you can follow us wherever we're at. We're on YouTube and
Facebook, Rumble, all the podcast feeds like iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts.
Our website.
Absolutely, at livelifeinthespirit.com, and even TikTok. And for some great messages on these topics and so much more, check out Pastor Penny's YouTube channel at Penny Schulz.
Without the T. Well, we're so glad that you have come back and you're returning with us. If you did not see our part 1 from Palm Sunday through Easter, we encourage you highly to check it out, because we covered some really cool and interesting things. Those little bitty tidbits that you wouldn't even know, things that you've read in the scriptures that are just kind of happenstance maybe, or you just read it through and you don't realize the depth and the meaning to it. So really, really encourage you to go back and watch
part 1.
Well, today we're going to jump in with part 2, and we're picking up, we've seen through Jesus, his coming in through Palm Sunday. He had raised Lazarus from the dead, he'd been anointed, and then they go to the upper room, and they go through that Passover, that Seder meal. They go to the Mount of Olives.
They have the pressing.
And then the soldiers come.
That's kind of where we've left it.
Well, and then he went to Caiaphas' home.
Oh, yes.
And there's maybe a little more we're going to talk about that, possibly. But all this happened on what day?
The 6th day.
Should be Friday. And the 6th day is important. Why?
Because it's the day of man.
And what is the day of man?
Well, that's the day that man was created in the creation story.
Correct. Well, it's on this 6th day that Christ was arrested, he was beaten, he was bound, he was scourged, he was abused, he was mocked, humiliated, degraded, stripped, naked, nailed to a cross. And he was put on display as a blasphemer and a criminal, cursed, judged, guilty, condemned to death. All this happened on
the 6th day.
God made man in his image. So on the 6th day, man made God
in his image.
And God allowed himself to bear the image of man, that man might again be allowed to bear the image of God. God allowed himself to bear the image of the fallen man, that man might bear the image
of the risen God.
How cool is that? A lot of these little tidbits and excerpts that we've gotten have come from a wide array of people, like Chuck Missler and Skywatch TV, Derek and Sharon Gilbert, Tom Horn, Donna Howell, Allie Anderson,
Jonathan Cahn
has had a lot of this. His Book of Mysteries is just full and teem and brimming of wonderful, wonderful information that we wouldn't know if we weren't Jewish. And there's another one too. Actually, this one was in Jonathan's book. It's the Rosh Pinah, which means literally
the cornerstone.
The cornerstone is what?
That's the first stone that's put into place when a building is built. And it's incredibly important because if it's not perfect and done perfectly well, then it can throw off the entire building. And you'll often see it marked in buildings even to this day. You'll see the cornerstone marked.
In fact, the church both churches I serve have the cornerstone. The FCC has 2 of them because the first part of the church was built in 1886 and the second part was in 1903. Well, in Psalms 118, the song of Passover, they've literally been singing the song of Christ this whole time and they didn't realize it. It says, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. Messiah is what?
It's the cornerstone. He is the cornerstone.
So for thousands of years, the Jewish people had been singing in the Psalms this particular song on Passover about Christ. And he is right there, and they did not get it. But here's the interesting thing. So Rosh is head, which means top, right? So Rosh Hashanah, it does not only mean the cornerstone, but it has another meaning. It also means the capstone.
Which is the final piece, the last piece that's put into place.
It's the stone that completes the building. So Jesus is both
the cornerstone and the capstone. The first and the last. The Alpha and the Omega.
The beginning and the end. That's just neat.
It really is. There's so much symbolism and so much of fulfillment.
And we would miss that if we didn't know it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this one I'm probably going to butcher, but I think it's Kat Aha. It's the name on your sin. So the Asham, which the Asham was the sacrifice with Abraham. Mm-hmm. It's the sacrifice that takes away the sin at Yom Kippur, the holiest of all holy days. It's on the Day of Atonement. And it was a sacrifice that took away the sins of the entire nation of Israel. Well, Messiah is the sacrifice that takes away
the sin of the world.
But this word actually has a double meaning. On one hand, it means sin offering, but on the other hand, it means the sin.
Interesting.
So in order for Messiah to take away the sin, he has to become sin himself. And it shows up in the New Testament in 2 Corinthians 5:21.
It says, he made him who knew no sin to become sin for us.
So that means every sin bears the name of the sacrifice, then every sin bears his name.
Boy, that's rough.
It does. And it means that all of your sins belong to him. That's some pretty powerful
It really is.
food to chew on. So we're talking about Yom Kippur. We talked a little bit about that with the priests when they had to lay the hands on the head.
Right.
But there's also another unique thing that's called the devil.
And you know, I was just thinking, it's possible that not everyone knows what Yom Kippur is.
That's true.
So can you maybe give us a quick rundown?
Yom Kippur is in typically around October. It is right after Rosh Hashanah, right after the Feast of Trumpets. There's the 3 feasts or the 4 feasts in the fall there. Rosh Hashanah, Feast of Trumpets, which now they've moved it to that time. Then Yom Kippur, and then you have the Feast of Tabernacles. And those are the feasts that have not yet been completely fulfilled.
Right.
So Yom Kippur is the holiest of all holy days, and that is the time, very quick, that the priests would take 2 goats, and they would cast lots. And the lot that fell on the one goat became the sacrificial goat, and the other goat became the scapegoat. And all the sins would be put onto the scapegoat, and he would be sent off into the wilderness, and then they would sacrifice the other goat. Well, that was all great until one year when the goat came back.
The scapegoat.
That was not good.
Right.
Yeah. So
the sins came back.
No, so they would take him and push him off a cliff so they couldn't go back. So if you've heard the term, there's a lot of these things. You know, we talked about the threshold covenant, and then you had the scapegoat. That's where all this stuff comes from. Mm-hmm. Well, this Day of Atonement was the one time, this was the time that the chief priest could go into the Holy of Holies. And they would not only, so the goat was sacrificed outside, and he would go in with the blood and put it on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant, and he would offer up incense to God.
And it would wipe away the sins of the Jewish nation for a day. But it was for the year. They did it once a year.
But those 2 goats had to be identical in appearance. So both unblemished, both identical. The lot was just cast on whichever one it fell. So if that's the case, if Jesus is going to become the final atonement for that Yom Kippur, that means that it can't just be him, but there has to be 2.
There has to be the scapegoat.
Did that actually happen?
It did, oddly enough. And I know initially you might think, well, yes, Pilate let them choose but the other wasn't equal to Jesus.
Well, here's the thing. Pilate had never, ever offered up two to be chosen, to pick one from to let go. It was because it was a goodwill gesture. You know, it's all the political stuff back and forth that they had to try to appease. And, all right, I'll make the Jews happy. I know this is their big day, and so I'll pull out a prisoner, and I will just release one. But they didn't get to pick. This was totally different. When the high priest took Jesus to Pilate, and he had examined him, he washed his hands of him, and he sent him to Herod. And Herod didn't do anything with him.
Right.
Sent him back. So Jesus was literally in the palace of David as David's son. He goes back to Pilate. Pilate says, I still don't see anything, so I'm going to let your own people choose. So this was the first time that he offered up two people. He could have just let Jesus go, but he didn't. And of all the people to bring up, he brings up a man by the name of
Barabbas.
So what would be so special of Barabbas? Well, it wasn't actually him that was so special, but it was his name. I said you had to have two that were identical. And Barabbas in Hebrew actually means bar, Abbas, which bar, it means son, and Abba means the father.
So his name literally means son of the Father.
And Jesus is who?
The son of the Father.
And this is where we get the scapegoat, the one set free. Because they get the crowd all riled up, and they choose Barabbas, and they say, crucify Christ. All those little things.
That had to be fulfilled in order for the sacrifice to truly count and to wipe away the sins of the Jewish people. All of those things had to be fulfilled. And God created all of that, so he's not going to have this big gesture of sacrifice and not have it be getting off on a technicality.
Bingo. Well, even the crowns. Pilate had a crown of thorns put on his head, but he also had a thing nailed above his cross. That was king of the Jews. He was king of what? He was king of the curse.
Right.
It was way more than king of the Jews. He was king of everything. The curse, the fall of man. And the thorns were a sign from the curse of Genesis.
Right, because there were no thorns or thistles before, because in the garden all was good.
Exactly.
And when they were kicked out, God said they would have to work and toil, and there would be thorns and thistles. So it's a sign of that fall.
It's the sign of the curse, the sign of the fallen world, and the crown signifies, though, kingship, royalty. And the moment the crown is placed on one's head, they feel the weight of the kingdom that rests upon them. So this time, the kingdom that rests upon Christ is the curse. So now he will bear the pain and the tears of man. But he becomes the king over it.
Right.
The weight was not too much for him to bear. He overcame it. He becomes king of the curse, but king of the cursed. And that is where our hope lies.
Absolutely.
So they take him up the hill. They take him back from town down the Kidron Valley. And if they go up to the Mount of Olives, where we actually believe that's where he was crucified for many reasons. One, it was on the main road as you came across. And they would crucify people on the main road. But two, there was another thing that said you had to be kind of crucified by where the crime was committed. And where did they arrest Jesus?
On the Mount of Olives, in the garden.
Right there. And where is Jesus coming back?
On the Mount of Olives.
Everything kind of happens on the Mount of Olives. And it's really weird because this little parking lot that's there has got this one oak tree growing out of the middle of it. And it's a small parking lot. And it is in the worst place. And this tree is just in the worst of the worst place as far as if you want to try to park or maneuver. And for years they have tried to get rid of that tree. And yet
it still stands.
They've tried to excavate that property to build apartment complexes or something, and everything falls through. This tree is old.
And it is protected.
It is, and it's ugly. Everything around it is ugly. And yet, out of all the places, we were in Jerusalem, and so many just leave you cold. That was the only place it was like you felt it in your soul. That just, it just felt right.
Mm-hmm.
And across the street is another very interesting archaeological find that we will get into later.
That's right.
But it's wherever they crucified Jesus on a hill, where he took his cross, there was a reason why he was crucified on a tree.
Mm-hmm. The first tree was of good and evil, and man took and ate and lost paradise.
The cross is the second tree. Through the first one, sin begins.
But through the second one, sin ends.
Through the first tree, man fell.
And through the second, man rises.
And through the living tree came death.
But through a dead tree comes life.
In partaking of the first tree, we die.
And partaking of the second, we live.
And Jesus said on the cross, I love this, today you will once again be with me in paradise. The very first tree was in that paradise in the garden.
Mm-hmm.
And when Jesus says, you'll be with me in paradise again, even though they all three were hanging on dead trees,
right,
he was making the fulfillment and encircling that.
Mm-hmm.
Before Jesus was placed on that cross, though, it's kind of hard to do this. I mean, it's still kind of chronological, but, you can't do it to
There's
the
so
minute.
many pieces,
Yeah. To me, this is probably my favorite thing that I learned that has always held the most meaning, and it's hard for me, even after all these years, to get through it without tearing up. Mm-hmm. It's called the Tamim, and that really means is the temple lambs. Now, who are the temple lambs? They're the lambs given for
sacrifice.
And there's only one place that those lambs can be, and that's where? Be raised.
Oh, outside of Bethlehem.
See, that was the rub. The Jews didn't like sheep because they were stinky, they were dirty, and they didn't like shepherds. But they had to have something close enough because that's what they used for temple sacrifice.
Right.
So it was agreed upon to have one place be the central location for the sacrificial lambs, and that would be a little town 4 miles out of Jerusalem called Bethlehem. So this is where Jesus is born. We already talked about the connection with communion. There's another connection with the temple lambs, because it was the lambs when they were born, the shepherds were there to witness the birth of every sacrificial lamb. Mm-hmm. And they were on rock, and baby lambs can get hurt. Mm-hmm. And so they would wrap them in what?
Swaddling clothes.
But they weren't just any swaddling cloths, they were special cloths.
So when the priestly robes were to the point where they needed to be retired, they would take them and tear them into strips and use those to protect the lambs so that they didn't get injured.
Yes, they would just wrap them up in that. So that's why it's such a big deal when in the scriptures you see they told the shepherds, you will find a babe wrapped in swaddling cloths. Why? Well, because the shepherds were the first to know what those swaddling cloths represented. You didn't wrap babies in priestly clothes.
No.
Retired clothes. He was a sacrificial lamb from the beginning. So here we see these lambs. He says, you will offer the first lamb with a lot of tamid in the morning at about 9 o'clock. And then you will offer the second lamb to finish the whole day of sacrifice at about 3 o'clock. That's the evening lamb. Mm-hmm. So when Jesus was being nailed to the cross, the shofar was playing in the background at the temple, and they were starting the first sacrifice. So Jesus had to be the guilt offering. He had to take on all that sin and all the sacrifices for that full 6 hours until 3 o'clock.
Yep.
When the last lamb was sacrificed. And the priest would throw open his arms and he would say, it is finished. The shofar would play. And you can just hear Jesus in the background, hearing the shofar say, it is finished. And he lifted up his spirit. He had endured everything the whole time of the sacrifice, down to the minute, on the cross. if that doesn't just get you to the core.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of people said, well, why did he have to be up there for 6 hours? How did he endure that long? How could a person who had bled out everything before they even sacrificed him do that? That is why.
That is why.
You know, and also through the Passover meal, the Pesach meal, the lamb that they had to eat, that they had to roast, there was specific instructions for that. In fact, that lamb, no bone could be broken, and we know from the prophecy that on Christ, what?
No
No bone can be broken. That is why when the other 2 thieves on the cross, when they came by and saw that they weren't dead yet, they busted their legs, so that way it would speed up the death process. When they came to Jesus, he was already dead. That's why he pierced his side, which was prophesied about.
Mm-hmm.
But with the lamb, no bone could be broken. Well, it makes it really hard. You could not basically gut a lamb.
Mm-hmm.
You had to cook everything. So how do you roast it? Well, they would take a pole. They were told to take a pole and run it horizontally to open up the chest for even roasting. So they would take that other pole and run it vertically from top down and stick it in over the hot coals, and that's what roasted that lamb. Well, as this lamb is splayed, of course, you cannot cook it with the entrails because that would ruin the meat. So they took the intestines out, and they brought it up and coiled it on the top of the head of the lamb, and it was literally called the crown of blood. So I want you to think about that. For all these thousands of years, the Jewish people during Pesach had been roasting their lambs on a cross with a crown of blood on its head. And here you have
Jesus
the
as the
final
sacrificial
atonement
lamb
on a cross with a crown of blood on his head. And they just didn't get it.
No.
But there was a lot of things that happened after that. So when Jesus gave up his spirit and he died, this is where a lot of people miss.
And this part I just love. I think this is amazing. All 3 of those pieces I just absolutely love.
Well, this is the exciting thing, because when he gives up his spirit, there is a huge earthquake. And a lot of things happen during that earthquake. Yes, tombs are open. Many people have risen, or they're seen walking around.
Right.
And this could get controversial, and again, this is opinion.
Mm-hmm.
It is taken from Ron Wyatt, actually, but it makes so much sense. As you see, God has done every little teeny tiny detail. Why would the biggest detail be left out? In order for the Day of Atonement, in order for the sacrifice to be complete, that once a year on Yom Kippur, the blood had to be sprinkled on the mercy seat or it didn't count.
And that mercy seat would be on the top of the Ark of the Covenant.
The Ark of the Covenant was gone. The Ark of the Covenant's been gone since Jeremiah. We think maybe we might know where the Ark of the Covenant is. And I would argue that where Jesus was crucified, when the earthquake happened, that blood-soaked, stained cross, when the earthquake split the rocks open, dripped down from the cross,
and that mercy seat was
the mercy seat below. It is the biggest puzzle. It is the biggest piece. And why would God fulfill everything else but that?
He wouldn't.
And it has been hidden this whole time. But there was a chain reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Because when a lot of people talk about that earthquake, I've heard many scholars say that they believe the earthquake happened because of the resurrection of the souls. There was so much energy that's what prompted the earthquake. Because if we see in Revelation, that happens again.
Oh yeah, several times. Happens at the rapture. Happens with the witnesses.
Each time something is raptured, huge
earthquake,
all in energy. But in the temple, something happens. So from the very beginning, from the fall of man, is when the separation came. Because God had been walking in the garden with man. But when the fall happened, there were cherubim that were placed in front with a flaming sword, and that's what kept Adam and Eve from being able to go into the garden. And a lot of people say, well, that's really mean. Why would God kick them out and keep them out? That's not fair. Well, there was a reason, because there's two trees.
Mm-hmm.
The tree of
knowledge of good and evil,
and
the tree of life.
So since they had already partaken from the tree of good and evil, there was a reason why God did not want them to eat at the tree of life. It wasn't because he was being mean. It was because since they had already known sin, had they eaten from the tree of life, they would have forever been damned.
Stuck in sin.
They would have never had redemption. And so by keeping them out, by keeping them from partaking of that, yes, it started into motion, sin and death, but a way for redemption was made.
Mm-hmm.
But there was that barrier.
Mm-hmm.
And when God resided in the Ark of the Covenant, what was on top of the covenant?
Cherubim, to protect and guard that separation between God and man.
So in the temple then, there was another separation between, you had the outer court, you had the inner court, you have inside the temple, and then in front of the Holy of Holies.
There is this massive, massive veil or curtains. Parachet? I don't know if I'm saying that right, but we're talking like 120 feet long, 60 feet high, and 4 inches thick. This was not your run-of-the-mill sheer curtain.
How do you even make material like
I
that?
have no idea. I don't even know how we would do that today, let alone back then.
And it had cherubim on it.
Right. So again, the cherubim were there to keep protection between the separation of God and man. But when that earthquake happened, that veil was literally torn in two.
And it says from top to bottom. 4
Because,
inches thick.
I mean,
60 feet long.
Yeah, we don't have
Tall.
anything that can just, rip that. So Christ's sacrifice removed the barrier between God and man. Finally, we are free to come back to him.
That there was no more separation. And there's more than that. This is one that a lot of people don't know. They'll say, oh, they knew about because it's in the scripture.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing. There was also another thing. And in Hebrew, it's called the hakal. Besides the temple curtain, there were these 2 big golden doors that were on the outside. Like, we're talking, you get through the outer and the inner courts, and you get to the temple, and there's 2 big gold doors that you would walk through before you would get to the Holy of Holies. Well, that's what the name of these 2 doors were, the hakal. And it said that after Messiah's death, it was recorded by the priest that those big golden doors would no longer close. They began to open by themselves. Another barrier, which separated man from God, was removed.
And then the third thing that I just think is a miracle on top of a miracle. I mean, that's what it is. So every year on Yom Kippur, so there was a scarlet cord that hung in the temple that showed it was scarlet because of our sin. It was stained scarlet because of our sin. And every year on Yom Kippur, after the sacrifice was made, a miracle happened and that cord became white for one day. And then the next day, it turned back scarlet because the Jewish people had to constantly be reminded that their sin was not atoned for. After Jesus was crucified, that cord went white, never to go scarlet again, because our sins were washed clean. He was the final sacrifice, and we don't have to continue to do that over and over because we are made pure in and through him.
That is so neat. That is so awesome. And yet, how did they miss it? Because it wasn't even Yom Kippur.
Mm-mm.
I mean, he was sacrificed in the spring, and Yom Kippur happens in the fall. And yet, and it never turned back scarlet again. So Jesus did all of this. He did everything on the 6th day, the day of man. Man was created on the 6th day. He fell on the 6th day. The Hebrew tradition, a day is from sundown to sundown. So starting
that's
at
why
Passover.
Thursday night to Friday night, that's how it happened all in one day.
But one may ask, that doesn't make sense though. How did Jesus celebrate Passover but be the Passover lamb? And that is very interesting. It's all to do, there's a 12-hour discrepancy. If you go by the Galilean calendar, they go from sunup to sunup. And the Judean calendar goes from sundown to sundown. So Jesus literally celebrated, which is interesting. I mean, this would have had to been a change from tradition because he knew what was coming. He celebrated the Passover meal, was the Passover celebrated with his disciples on the Galilean calendar, but then became the Passover lamb on the Judean calendar. That's kind of cool. He did it all in one day. Because they laid him in the tomb at dark, the light of the world had gone out and had been taken from the earth. But just like with every day, the darkness gives way to the breaking of dawn, the sun will rise. So he was in the tomb on that. Everything happened on the 6th day. They laid him in the tomb as sun went down. So he was in the tomb on the 7th day. What's the significance of that?
Well, it's interesting because it's a day of rest. And his body was resting on the 7th day. However, his spirit was not resting because he was having a little conversation.
So where did he go?
He went to Tartarus and preached to the captives, is what it says.
So we know that Tartarus is where the fallen angels are kept.
Right.
And we know that a lot of people say it's not hell. Tartarus is far below hell as hell is below earth or whatever. I mean, it's in planes, but it's,
Scripturally,
it's not the same, and it's quite a ways.
Right.
But he went down there, and he wasn't preaching to them. He was just basically telling them, you thought you won, you didn't. I'm getting out of here. You're still stuck.
Oh, by the way, I'm taking the keys.
Yes. And he grabbed the keys to hell and death, and he took them away. But we just got through doing Revelation 9 when he gives those keys to who?
Satan. No.
Well, could be he gives them to an angel.
Angel, yeah.
Who comes down and opens up the keys, the gates to hell. So right there is where you get that. It's all interconnected. There would be no keys to give if he had not died and gone down to Tartarus and took them away in the first place. Which I had to laugh because it just shows that when you're in the ministry, there is no day of rest. Even when Jesus was dead, he wasn't resting. He was still doing ministry because he was coming back.
That's right. He is not done yet.
Well, now we're going to move past that day of rest in the tomb to Sunday morning, which is the first day of the week. But it's not just the first day. This happens to be a special day. It was not just any first day of the week. It's called the Day of Reshit. The Day of Reshit is the day after the Sabbath. It's the first fruits, but it's at a specific time. It can only happen after Passover.
That's right.
So the beginning of the harvest, the first grain, the new harvest, the first fruits would represent all that would be reaped and gathered in the days that followed. So on the Day of Reshit, the first sheaf from the spring harvest would be lifted up to God and dedicated to Him. And since it represented all the sheaves that would follow, by its consecration, the entire harvest was consecrated. Well, it would all take place on the day after the Sabbath of Passover. And it was the day of new life, the day that sealed the ending of winter and the beginning of springtime. But when did Jesus die?
He died on Passover. He was laid in the tomb on the Sabbath of Passover.
So he arose on the Sabbath of Passover, which is the day of Reshit, or first fruits. Now, this gets to be really interesting, because what do we call that day?
Easter.
Okay, now this gets to be really interesting, and probably going to ruffle some feathers here, because it's tradition. So I've known it to be called Easter ever since I've been born. In fact, it's probably been called Easter ever since Constantine, I imagine. But there's a problem with that. Is Easter, it's not a Jewish word, and it's not even a Christian word. What is it?
It's a pagan word, actually. And it was, I'm going to butcher saying it, like Oestra. And it was a holiday that was used to celebrate the coming of spring and fertility and new life.
It's Astarte.
Yes.
Ashtoreth.
Oh.
Yeah, we talked about her. In fact, you should go back and see our, if you have not seen our Return of the Gods, and actually, quite interesting, that was the least watched one. Very, very interesting, as we are in the time of Ashtoreth. Isis Astarte right here in America right now. That's what's going on. And she is what's behind the word Easter.
Right.
So it is fertility, and that's why there's eggs and chicks and bunnies. And I learned something very interesting that I did not know.
That this particular bunny, or hare, that they, aside from the normal reasons we all know that they pick bunnies for fertility, there is one particular hare that can literally become pregnant while still pregnant. And so it was just seen, I mean, that's why we have the Easter bunny. That's where all that originated from. Now, I have eaten my fair share of chocolate bunnies and given them to my kids and
dyed Easter eggs and had Easter eggs.
Right. We're not suggesting that all of that needs to be wiped out, but just being aware.
Yeah, because once you know, you can't unknow. So it's not Easter, it's Resurrection Day, and it's first fruits. It's resheet. It's all these other words that you probably never heard, but you've heard the pagan one of Easter. Here's another interesting thing, too. Because of the calendars and the way they shift, I've done a lot of research on this, and it's still confusing. Mm-hmm. But what we celebrate as Resurrection Day does not land with Passover. Mm-hmm. And it should, because Jesus arose on resheet, right. On first fruits.
That was the whole point, because it fulfilled the fact that when he arose and was consecrated, then he consecrated all of us.
Where Easter follows the equinox, which is another can be pagan thing. Right. So it just interesting how the world and how the enemy has even taken the most sacred day of all Christians, and we don't even celebrate it today. Now I know we don't know exactly when Christ was born. I'll argue I have a good idea in the fall, mm-hmm. But he was not born on December 25th.
Right. And we celebrate that day, and that's okay.
But just be aware.
Be aware.
That there is a time, and it is the day after the Sabbath of Passover that is called first fruits. And the reason for it is because since that first sheath would be given and consecrated to God, everything was consecrated after. This so happened with Jesus. Because Jesus arose and was consecrated, we are all consecrated in and through him. Right. And it would not happen if it had been on any other day. So let's look at that tomb. We know that very early in the morning, well, actually it was the night before, and that morning, where that tomb was at. The tomb itself. As we said, that when we kind of think we know a good idea of where Jesus probably was crucified, mm-hmm. And across the road from there, and diagonal, is a church that is on the area. It's called Paternoster. Mm-hmm. But there is a place that it protects.
There is. Because the church is there to signify Jesus teaching the Lord's Prayer to the disciples. And it's in lots of languages all around it. But you would think that would be a very well-traveled and well-populated tourist site.
And it is not.
And it is very well protected because there is a tomb there. And we know that Jesus was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. And he was a wealthy man, and his tomb would have matched his wealth and his status.
And status is a big part.
Yes.
Because it wasn't just wealth. You had to be high enough up that you could even get that kind of land, even if you had the money.
Right.
And especially where it's at. We're talking just basically across the road, up the way from where the cemetery is.
Right.
This tomb is massive. We'll put up some pictures here. Mm-hmm. We got to go inside of that. And when I say it's massive, I mean it's unbelievably massive. Now, you have to realize the tombs were not big enough for just one body.
No.
When they would do these, they would make them as like family tombs, not as a mausoleum. But they would take the body in, they would wrap it, they put the spices in it, and they would roll the tomb over. And because of the conditions, because of the heat and the humidity or dry heat, it'd take about a year, but that body would completely decay and decompose. And then at the end of the year, they would roll the stone back. They would go in. They would take the bones and it's called an actuary, those boxes, and they would put. If you've ever seen the skull and crossbones, that's where it came from. The actuary would be as long as the femur bones, and it'd be about as wide as the skull.
Mm-hmm.
And
so they would put them in there, and then the little bones, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and then it was ready to use again. Now, if you had several people die within, that's why there were multiple layers and levels to put bodies. Mm-hmm. So this tomb was massive, and with those layers, in fact, we got, I think, almost all 3 buses. It was 100 and some people in that tomb.
Now, we were cozy.
And it had a back door exit, too.
But we were all in there. And it definitely had the feel, more so than the garden tomb, the traditional, but all of it just seemed to fit so much more. And it definitely, I don't know, it's just like standing in that parking lot. There was something about that place.
And then erupted, up from the grave he arose with a mighty triumph for his foes. Everybody started singing in this tomb. There was not a dry eye, and not one person left there not changed.
It was incredible.
So this tomb, and it is in a garden. Mm-hmm. A tomb is a place of death, but it's a place that the world sees as hopeless and depressing and sorrowful, despairing. But yet redemption, it all starts in the tomb, at the place of hopelessness. Because the message of salvation and faith in the gospel. See, in God, the tomb is now a place of the beginning, not the ending. So to find life, Mary had to come to the tomb. This is where Mary found true hope. She found her true joy. Mm-hmm. And in death, she found
resurrection.
Jonathan Cahn said it the best, that it is in the tomb that we find our birth. Mm-hmm. I thought that was so cool. The Lord took man and placed him in the Garden of Eden. Mm-hmm. God's first act towards man was to bring him to a place of life and fruitfulness and blessing. And he brought him to the garden on the
6th day.
Messiah died on the 6th day, on Friday. They took him down from the cross, they laid him in a tomb, but it was a
garden tomb.
And on the 6th day, God brought man into the garden. So on the 6th day, man brought God
into the garden tomb.
And the garden is a place of life, but a garden tomb,
it's a place of death.
And Eden was a place of blessing.
The tomb a place of sorrow.
And Eden was a place of God's creation.
But the garden tomb was a place of man's creation.
Chisels and hammers.
Mm-hmm.
So God brought man into the place of God's blessing.
Man brought God into the place of man's curse. Why?
It's because God allowed himself to be brought to the place of our curse, to give us the power to leave that place, that he might once more bring us to a place of life and to life of his blessings. This is another little interesting tidbit. When God created man and put him in the garden, besides the animals, what did God give man?
Eve.
Woman. Mm-hmm. So woman was the next person in the garden. And when Jesus was in the garden, who was the first person after his resurrection that came to the tomb?
Mary.
It was Mary. How neat is that? The parallel between that. It did not escape the sight of God. And did you know how many days are there in a week?
Last time I checked, 7.
Unless you're a Beatles fan.
8 days a week. God was a Beatles fan.
There you go. Actually, there is an 8th day.
Tell
I
me
bet
more.
you didn't know this, yes. In the scroll, it says you will celebrate the feast of the Lord for 7 days with a complete rest on the 1st day and a complete rest on the 8th day. The Feast of Tabernacles is what it's talking about. We talked about that was a fall festival.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do you get 8 days out of 7-day week?
I am not sure.
Well, 7 is the number of the days of creation.
Well, is there an 8th day then?
Well, no, and yes. 8 speaks of which is to come after the end. 8 is a number that transcends creation. It breaks out of time and time beyond time.
That makes more sense.
Jesus was the 8th day and transcends all time. Well, while he was in that tomb, we know that it says that they laid the sheet over him because the Sabbath was coming and they did not have time to properly prepare the body. So Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus went in with all the spices. It was like 80 pounds of spices, I think, or something like that. But since they could not properly do what they needed to, the stone was rolled in front and guards were posted in front of that tomb so nobody could come in or go out.
That's right.
Well, we know that when the morning came and the women went into the tomb, the stone was already rolled away. They were trying to figure out how they were going to do this. The stone is huge. It's really heavy, but it's on a track. So once you get going, it doesn't so much flip this way. It'll
roll
through. But it was already open. So now they're wondering what's going on.
Right.
They're still wondering what's going on. They're in a daze, they're in denial, they're in shock, they're in awe. And when they go in and they look, it's in the Gospel of John where this is mentioned, John 20, verse 7. It talks about the cloth that is over Jesus' face. And how was that?
It was neatly folded and laid down, not just tossed to the side. Which I read that multiple times, never having any idea that there was actually significance in that. But there is.
There is. So this goes to the whole king analogy. So when the king was eating, if he was done eating his meal, he would pick up the cloth and he would crumple it up and he would drop it on his plate. And that signified to him, I'm done, take it away. But if he'd been interrupted throughout the meals, as they did many times, he would take that napkin and he would fold it into a square and he'd lay it down, which signified to the servant
that he was coming back.
Don't touch. And how the rest of the sheet was just laying there, but it was the face sheet. Then it's called the napkin, and it was folded up, signifying that he was not done,
and that he was coming back.
So when Mary comes to the tomb and she sees that and he says, go, tell the others, have them come. And they came and he wasn't there and they went back and they're in the upper room. They're in that same room, and we're going to put up a picture of that because it's cool. We have it, so we're going to do it.
That's right.
But they were huddled up there in that room, still trying to figure out what was going on. Now Jesus wasn't there, even though he told them multiple times what was going to happen and that he was going to rise. He even told them to meet me in Galilee, and not one person went to Galilee. Just kills me. So, but when he shows up in the room, everyone's there but Thomas.
That's right.
But Jesus does something interesting, and you may not even think about this, but Jesus greets them with, peace be to you. He said that not once, but twice in that same encounter. Do you know why?
I don't.
It is the only recorded time of Jesus saying peace. And it's after the resurrection, not before. When Isaiah prophesied of the Messiah's atoning death, he wrote this: he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The punishment of our peace was upon him. Peace only comes after the atonement was made. So it was only after Messiah died on the cross and rose that peace could actually be given. So when he said shalom,
which means peace, but so much more.
It means so much more in Hebrew. Shalom means safety, rest, prosperity, wholeness, welfare, completion, fullness, soundness, and even well-being. So when Jesus was blessing them twice,
with all of that,
with one blessing, when he said shalom.
Shalom.
That's really neat. I mean, how many people, if you were to ask them how many times Jesus said peace, they
probably would think quite a few.
and probably way before his resurrection. Well, so this is all going to kind of circle back, because there was another prophecy. There was an encounter that happened in the Old Testament with Moses. That is the foreshadowing to this Holy Week right now that we're celebrating. Do you remember what that story was in the Old Testament?
Well, they were out. It was when the Israelites had sinned against God, and they sent poisonous snakes, which how they decided to send poisonous snakes was also kind of an interesting story, but not for today. And so whoever was bit by those snakes died. But God told Moses to, and we say snake, but really the word was nakash, and we've talked about that a number of times.
Which is a fiery, flying serpent.
So potentially an angel serpent,
Could have
possibly.
been a fallen angel.
But if you envision not just not a snake on a cross, because he said, God told Moses to make a snake out of brass and hang it on a pole. Well, if it was an angel or a serpent that had wings, and that was what was held up on the pole, that would very much signify a precursor to the cross. And all they had to do was look at it, and that brought them healing.
But here's the weird thing. But it was strange. You're bit by a serpent, but gazing at the brass serpent, or nakash, brought healing.
Well, we did talk about the fact that Jesus was the atonement for sin and sin itself. He was both.
You know, and when I think of this, you think of the story that you know, the lamb, sheep, when bit by the most poisonous snake, any other animal would die. But there is some sort of an antidote in the sheep's blood that protects them from the poison. Oh, they'll swell up, they'll get very sore, and it's painful. But they'll keep going around on eating and going about their daily life, and they don't die. The snake cannot kill the sheep, the lamb. And when I think of this, I think about the poisonous nakash that were killing people, but it was the nakash gazing at that. It was the forerunner. It was of Christ on the cross. And it's that sin healed by the serpent's venom, by the image of the serpent. That's strange. It's a double negative. But it reveals the power of sin and evil will be nullified
by the blood of the Lamb.
By looking at the image of sin, by believing in him who died on the cross, we are healed of sin and its power. So remember, no matter how bad the bite, no matter how poisonous and deadly his artillery is, the blood of the Lamb is the antidote.
That's right.
So ultimately, to really kind of wrap a lot of this up, there's another Hebrew word which actually means Israelite. It's ivorim. Ivory is the root of ar. To cross over. Ivorim is the plural. And it's the Hebrews are those who crossed over. They crossed over the Red Sea. They crossed over the Jordan River. But to be a believer, you must cross over from one life to the other. You know, Jesus told Nicodemus that unless you are born again of water and the Spirit, you cannot enter eternal life. You cannot cross over. It is only through that baptism and the believing in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior that you cross over from your old sinful life into a new life with God. Jesus literally is the ultimate Ivorim. He was Jewish, he was Hebrew, but he is the ultimate of ultimate because he is the only one who was able to destroy that veil. He's the only one that was able to take that cross, lay it down to make a bridge, to be the door to allow us to get into heaven.
That's right.
With God. That is so powerful.
It is.
That when the words that they give are everything that he is about and that he has done, but it takes it to a level beyond the stratosphere.
It does.
The meanings are so full. It broadens everything so much.
And how can you not be changed or impacted by that just by seeing the greatness and fullness of this plan that he literally connected from the beginning to what is yet to come and everything in between. It's incredible.
You know, that's what I get charged up about, is when I learn these new things. When you take something that you've read and you took it for granted, or you didn't really know, it's what it said. Sometimes there are just those things that God does that leaves you speechless. Even if it's standing in a nasty, gross-looking parking lot with broken glass, plastic bottles, looking at an old, ugly olive tree, knowing that that's probably the closest. Just thinking about those that are at the Western Wall and those that are under the tunnels going, this is as close as we could get to the Holy of Holies and the closest we could get to the sacrificial blood, and yet standing in a parking spot knowing that we were probably standing on top.
And where Jesus laid down his life.
Yeah. You know, and there's so much more to that too, because that place, it's called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. And a lot of people thought it's because it's in the shape of a skull or something like that. No, it's because a specific skull was literally buried on that place. And whose skull was that?
Goliath's.
Yes, King David buried Goliath's skull right there on that hill. Another fitting place. That Christ should be crucified on the same place.
And reclaiming that back. You know, it's mind-blowing, it's awe-inspiring, it's heart-wrenching to think that the God of the universe and his son loves us so much, you and me and everyone, that he was willing and voluntarily died on the cross for our sins. And he took the weight of that on, and he was pressed to the point of bleeding tears for us. All of these tiny little details are reassurances that even though God is so incredibly big, he cares enough to pay attention to all of the details, all of the little details. He planned it out and orchestrated it from the beginning, and it will play out until the very end.
You know, I am so glad that we decided to deviate and do these special episodes, because I know that during this time is sometimes when our hearts are a little more soft. I've been doing a lot of memorial services lately, and not all for those who maybe accepted Christ, and those sitting in those pews that are like those disciples, feeling hopeless and helpless and in pain and bewilderment and wondering what is next. That if they turn their faces to Christ, if they look to the redeeming Lamb, that is where our hope is. God did not leave Jesus in just an old ugly tomb. It was a garden tomb. No. It was a place of new birth. And he was only using it as an Airbnb anyway.
That's right.
But my prayer for you out there listening, and if you have loved ones, friends, that don't know Christ, that you would take this opportunity. I know we gave you a lot of things to think about. And I hope that you could go back and rewind, re-listen to some of this stuff. I've listened and read it multiple times. Again, pick up. If you have not picked up the Book of Mysteries by Jonathan Cahn, I strongly encourage you to do so. I've always said that if you could only own one other book besides the Bible, that's the book to own, because it just fleshes out the scriptures so much. And it reveals so much of the depth of the Jewish culture and language that we just don't know, that reveals so much more. Which shows the true nature of God. Those single words that have double meanings. The cornerstone
And
the capstone, the beginning and the end, the final atonement. Bethlehem, which was communion from the beginning and the end when he was born, to the sacrificial lamb who was wrapped in those priestly swaddling clothes, to the oil that was poured out for his kingship, and for the Pidyon Haben, the redemptive price that made him the high priest to be able to offer up the sacrificial lamb.
And the folded up napkin that shows that he is coming back. He is not finished.
And the infamous 8-day.
That's right.
That is what lives on in eternity, and that's what we have to look forward to, and that's what we're excited for, and what we want you to go and share that good news with. That we serve a risen Savior, not one that's still on a cross, not one that's dead. We serve the only God, who is a living God, who has a relationship with each and every one of us, if we're willing to be in relationship with him. And know that no matter what the enemy is doing to you right now, no matter how he is attacking you, or the poison that he is shooting your way, or the artillery, or you name it, that is through the blood of the Lamb and that threshold covenant. By inviting him into your home, he will protect you, and you are saved.
Amen.
Because you know what? When you learn all this stuff, once you know, you can't unknow. And whether you choose to believe all this or not, you can't say, we didn't tell you. So have a very happy Resurrection Day, first fruits. Until next time, the full meaning of the word Shalom.